to move that this House be now adjourned.
We move on to the adjournment debate. I'll let members, if they wish to leave very quietly.
Thank you.
Quietly. Thank you. So we're moving on to the adjournment debate. The question is that this House do now adjourn, and I call Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to finally begin the adjournment debate. And thank you for granting this important and timely debate. As the MP for a very vocal airport community, I'd like to welcome the Minister to his role and reassure him he'll be hearing from me a great deal over the coming Parliament. This is a topic that is very close to my constituents' hearts. Every morning at 4:30 a.m, they hear jet engines above their heads. Every year, an executive at Heathrow Airport threatens to bring back the third runway, and every decade, a new proposal to change the flight paths is put forward. My constituents are not alone. In the UK, more than 23% of the British population lives between 2 and 10 miles from an airport. While they accept aircraft noise as a fact of life, they should not be asked to tolerate constant attempts to increase the number of flights above their homes. In the first opening months of this new Parliament, Labour has a chance to step away from the damaging policies of the past and build a new relationship with airport communities. A relationship where the needs of local people and our environment are genuinely balanced against the demands of the aviation industry. To begin rebalancing this relationship, I urge the Department for Transport to consider 3 requests. First, to acknowledge the health impacts of night flights on airport communities and work to ban them above heavily populated areas. Second, accept that expansion of Heathrow Airport would fly in the face of Britain's climate targets and have an unacceptable impact on my constituents in Richmond Park and elsewhere across London and the South East. And third, to recognise that any proposals to change flight paths above London and the South East should be accompanied with a proposal for a do minimum approach, ensuring that people do not have to accept change merely for the sake of change. Turning first to the issue of night flights. Night flights are the most intrusive form of aircraft noise, and there is clear evidence that they harm the physical health of residents who live under flight paths. Long-term exposure to nocturnal aircraft noise is strongly linked to sleep disorders and broader health impacts.
Will my honourable friend give way on that point?
With pleasure.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way on that point and also for bringing forward this incredibly important debate. Like with her constituency, my constituents, the residents of Twickenham, Teddington, Whitton and the Hamptons, are very concerned about the impact of aircraft noise above them. Does she agree with me that given the Civil Aviation Authority itself has acknowledged that there's evidence that there's long-term aircraft noise has a harmful effect on children's memory, on sustained attention, reading comprehension and reading ability, for the sake of children's health right across our constituencies but also all of West London, we need really strict restrictions on night flights, which frankly at the moment all of the rules are being flouted on a regular basis by these massive jet engines overnight.
She is absolutely right. My honourable friend is absolutely right. She speaks very passionately on behalf of her constituents in Twickenham, who I know are blighted by these issues just as much as my constituents in Richmond Park. And she's absolutely right about the health impacts of long-term exposure to nocturnal aircraft noise. It is strongly linked to sleep disorders and broader health impacts. For each additional 10 decibels of nighttime aircraft noise that communities are exposed to, there is an increase of between 14% and 69% in residents' risk of high blood pressure, increasing the risk of strokes and heart attacks. Other researchers have found links between long-term exposure to aircraft noise and an increased risk of obesity, depression and cardiovascular issues. The human cost of these flights is substantial, but when I have raised this issue in the House, government ministers have fallen back on a study by York Aviation that argued that night flights add billions to our economy. This study has been repeatedly challenged on both its outcomes and methodology, and I would urge the Minister to instruct his officials to examine the wider body of evidence. Researchers at the Transport Research Service and Consultancy CE Delft found that a ban on night flights would only harm the national economy if the passengers who currently arrive on scheduled flights before 6 a.m. were not transferred to other flights. In addition, the Heathrow Association for the Control of Aircraft Noise has pointed out that estimates around the value of night flights often massage the definitions of nighttime jobs, therefore inflating key figures. In light of this, I urge the Government to commit to commissioning a full independent analysis on the impact of night flights on our economy, residents' physical health and local people's mental well-being to inform a potential ban on night flights at Heathrow. While night flights are a constant concern to my residents, the spectre of the third runway continues to hang over south-west London. Hansard shows that the third runway has been mentioned no less than 115 times in this House and has been the topic of 3 debates, 2 early day motions and countless open letters. Despite the efforts of dozens of MPs, the last government resolutely refused to abandon the project. They said we should ignore the 210 million tonnes of CO2 it would generate every year, that we should ignore the £100 billion it would cost to clean up the damage the runway would do to our environment, and that we should ignore the impact it will have on air quality in our communities.
Will she give way again?
I'm delighted.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that there is absolutely no way this government can meet its net zero and climate commitments if it gives the green light to a third runway at Heathrow, as has been widely reported? And actually the Energy and Net Zero Secretary himself is on record in the past as having been very against a third runway at Heathrow, and he should be fighting the corner of the environment and our planet and the health and well-being of our constituents by standing up to the Department for Transport in giving any green light to a third runway at Heathrow.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. Again, she is absolutely right, and we've seen just this week, or in this last week, the Prime Minister give a new impetus to the achievement of our net zero targets, and it is absolutely essential that we have another look at the damage that a third runway would cause at Heathrow, and to seriously re-examine the case for proceeding in the light of that, but also, as my honourable friend says, the impact it has on our communities. A meta-analysis of 70 studies published between 2000 and 2020 has shown that researchers consistently find elevated levels of ultrafine particulate matter in airport communities. Constant exposure to these particulates can lead to decreased lung function, oxidative DNA damage and premature death. Allowing the third runway and the 260,000 flights it will add to London's skies is not only an annoyance to residents, it's a risk to their health. But the third runway would have further far-reaching consequences than simply tainting the air that my constituents breathe. At COP29 this week, the Prime Minister's vowed to cut UK emissions by 81% before 2035. However, his own Chancellor has refused to take the third runway off the table. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know from reading the 115 references to the third runway in Hansard that government ministers from both main parties are happy to avoid answering opposition MPs' questions. For this reason, I urge the Minister to consider the words of his colleague, the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. I raise the issue, he says, of the Heathrow third runway gingerly, but if we are so serious about this climate emergency, I do not see how we cannot look at all the things that the government and the private sector are doing and ask whether they make sense in a net zero world.
Hear, hear.
In the last division on the third runway, 7 members of the current cabinet, including the Prime Minister, opposed expansion. So I urge the Minister to work across departments to ensure that government policy reflects their commitments to both our local communities and our planet before any decision on the third runway is made. Finally, while night flights and the third runway have been constant sources of concern to my residents over the past decade, they now must contend with the government's new proposals for airspace modernisation. Now, while I understand that these proposals are intended to improve efficiency at the airport and bring aviation in London into the 21st century, I would ask for caution. Last year, the London Assembly passed a motion calling on the airport to recognise the damage its proposals would have on Richmond Park's wildlife and ecology. This motion highlighted that redirecting 60,000 planes over London's largest nature reserve flies in the face of decades of conservation efforts. Indeed, both the noise from long-haul flights and the additional pollution from fuel dumping could change this fragile ecosystem for years to come. At the same time, airspace modernisation would lay the groundwork for an increase in the number of aircraft movements at Heathrow and expose new communities across south-west London to aircraft noise directly above their homes for the first time. The proposed UK Airspace Design Service will, of course, help to guide the development of these new flight paths, but it is essential the public are given a genuine chance to choose between these proposals. When the proposed flight path systems are put to public consultation next year, I would urge the Minister to ensure that residents can choose a do minimum option. Yeah. New guidance systems can be integrated and small amendments to current systems made, but ultimately there should be an option to maintain the path in a roughly similar location. We should not simply ask communities to accept change for the sake of change. They deserve a real choice over the future of their skies rather than a forced decision between bad options. Madam Deputy Speaker, London is one of the most overflown capital cities in the Western world. Hundreds of thousands of Londoners across the city experience the negative impacts of aircraft noise, and yet the government tiptoes around real measures that would improve residents' lives. By banning night flights, abandoning the third runway, and giving our constituents a genuine choice over the positioning of flight paths, ministers would demonstrate to London's airport communities that we are being heard. The last government's policy on the aviation sector was marked by an inability to stand up for communities' rights in the face of Heathrow and other airports. The Minister now has a chance to be better than his predecessors, to put people before profit and to consider what is really best for the capital and airport communities across the UK. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Richmond Park on securing this debate on the impact of aircraft noise on local communities, and thank her for her speech this evening. I know that aviation noise presents a sensitive issue. I grew up under the flight path of Manchester Airport, so I remember the BA 111s, the Tridents, the Concorde. Even as a school child, I saw the space shuttle do a low pass on a jumbo jet, which inspired me for the rest of my life. Thank God we don't have those planes anymore, I would say, and the smell that emitted from them. But we need to strike a fair balance in the impacts of aviation into the local environment and communities, but also the economic benefits that flights bring. This is a challenge for aviation noise policy. Now, we've heard from the Honourable Member speak. She spoke passionately tonight about the impact of aviation on noise, but I do recognise that noise from aircraft, particularly at night, brings impacts to the local community and can impact, as she says, on physical and mental well-being. Major airports with more than 50,000 movements per year are obliged under the environmental noise regulations to produce noise action plans. Noise action plans act as a driver for aircraft noise management and for the mitigation that's required around airports. I'm pleased to report that all major airports in the scope of this regulation have now produced their noise action plans for 2024 to 28, with the exception of the noise action plan for Manchester Airport in my constituency, which was submitted later. I can confirm that these noise action plans have now been adopted by the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. In the case of Heathrow Airport, the noise action plan has been published and it follows consultation, as she so rightly said, with local stakeholders. The Heathrow Noise Action Plan is supplemented with a commitment to commissioning and supporting research and a focus on improving the way in which the airport communicates and engages with local communities. Heathrow see this last element as pivotal in helping them to understand and address key priorities for local people. I'm also aware that Heathrow has a sustainability plan which covers a wide range of issues in relation to noise management. The airport has set a clear objective to reduce the number of people sleep-disturbed and highly annoyed by 2030 compared to 2019, which was its baseline. The airport has been working to develop, test and finalise a new package of noise insulation, vortex protection and home relocation support, known as the Quiet Neighbourhood Support Scheme. Heathrow's residential insulation scheme covers 100% of insulation costs to $34,000 for homes most affected by noise. Of course.
I'm grateful to him for highlighting the various packages that are available for people affected by noise, as he will appreciate quite a number of my constituents are in that position, and yet many of my constituents are finding that some of those packages are really insufficient and difficult to access. Would he agree to meet with me to discuss some of these individual cases?
I'm happy to meet with all individual members who want to improve the quality of their lives around our ports and our airports. Heathrow uses a differential charging structure for aircraft operating at the airport. This structure encourages the use of best-in-class aircraft, imposing higher charges for noisier aircraft and lower charges for quieter ones. And Heathrow encouraged the use of quieter planes by adjusting the differential in night and post-midnight charges for unscheduled operations, with the aim to reduce these operations after 23-30 hours. Now, the government too is committed to research in aviation noise, and 2 studies on sleep disturbance and annoyance and published 2 recently, and this varies by different times of night. The study, in collaboration with St George's University, London, National Centre of Social Research, Noise Consultants Limited and the University of Pennsylvania. This is the first study of aviation noise effects on sleep disturbance in the UK for 30 years. The first stage of the ANNIE study involved a cross-sectional survey of 4,000 people who live near 8 UK airports to assess the association between aircraft noise exposure at night and subjective assessments of sleep quality and annoyance. This stage of the study is currently going through peer review, and we expect to be publishing it during next year. The second stage of the study involves an observational study of individuals recruited from the survey to assess the association between aircraft noise exposure and objective sleep quality. This involves assessments of sleep disturbance and sound level measurements in participants' bedrooms. This stage of the study is currently in the field. Taken together, these pieces of evidence will be used to inform future policies for managing nighttime aviation noise exposure and assist with the management and mitigation of health impacts on local communities. They will also support any wider assessment of the costs and benefits of night flying. Our priority remains to deliver a high-quality, robust, evidence-based, and we're all taking the necessary steps to deliver this. We are now working on the basis that we will have the full evidence base from ANNIE published during autumn 2026.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way again. I am really pleased to hear that there is going to be a proper study of the impact of aviation noise on sleep disruption, and I very much look forward to that publication. He may have missed the early part of my speech where I asked for a much more robust study of the economic benefits of night flights, and I wonder if he could comment further on that.
I'll come to that in my speech, and I do look forward with meeting the Honourable Member, because I would like to have a safe cycle ride round Richmond Park one of these days. So I will be raising that with the constituency MP, and I think that could also help with climate mitigation and change. I'd look forward to her views on that. As I have acknowledged, noise from aircraft, particularly at night, brings impacts to local communities. At the same time, night flights are also a vital part of global aviation and provide significant economic benefit, not just to the capital city, but as we know, to the whole UK. The whole of the UK relies on Heathrow being our only hub airport, and to keep the flow of people, goods and services moving and supporting thousands of jobs as a result. With this in mind, for several decades, the government has set out noise controls, including restrictions on night operations at Heathrow, Gatwick and Stansted. Imagine my surprise as I become the new minister to realise I have direct powers over the South East 3 and no powers over the rest of the nation. That will change, hopefully, with years to come. These airports are designated for noise purposes under the Civil Aviation Act of 1982. The controls reflect the need to balance the impacts of communities with the benefits to the UK economy. We also know Heathrow is one of our major hub airports for cargo and freight that keeps this country fuelled, supplied and fed. At other airports, the government believes the noise controls are set locally by local ordnance and local competent planning authorities. The current night flight regime limits the number of flights for the purpose of noise management. The night flight restrictions significantly reduce the number of flights that could otherwise operate within the night quota period between 11:30 and 6 a.m. in the morning. Earlier this year, the Department of Transport consulted on proposals for the next night flight regime at Heathrow, Gatwick and Stansted airports. This is for the regime to commence in October 2025, a year or so from now. The consultation proposal that movements and quota count limits for Heathrow, Gatwick and Stansted would remain the same as they are for now for a 3-year period covering October 2025 to October 2028. This is while we await further evidence that could support change in the future. So I thank the Honourable Member for Richmond Park for a response to this consultation, and I hope soon to be in a position to announce a decision on the next night flight regime. At Heathrow, the number of movements permitted at the night quota period has not changed for many, many years. During this time, aircraft have become more quieter, as I said at the start of my speech, and the overall noise footprint of the airport has actually shrunk. Progress has been made. For example, at Heathrow between 2006 and 19, there has been a reduction of 21% in the number of households exposed to aircraft noise within the London 55 decibel noise contour area. New generation aircraft such as the Airbus A350 and Boeing 737 MAX have a noise footprint that is typically 50% smaller on departure and 30% smaller on arrival than the aircraft that they are replacing. And I talk with manufacturers all the time about the future of flight and how we carry on reducing the noise footprint of these vehicles. Overall, individual aircraft movement is expected to continue to fall in the future compared to today's levels. I just want to briefly touch on airspace modernisation. It is a key plank of our manifesto. It's one of our key commitments along with sustainable aviation fuel. We have an analogue system in our skies in the UK in a digital age, designed closer to the time that Yuri Gagarin, Madam Deputy Speaker, went into space than today. A pilot who travelled through time, coming in the TARDIS back to the future, would still be flying the same flight paths. They would still recognise them from over 60, 70, 80 years ago. I'm afraid that does have to change if we're going to maximise the benefit to aviation and growth and the carbon reduction it will bring if we can just get the flights not to circle over the Honourable Member's constituency but to fly in a straight line, point to point. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I did hear him from a sedentary position calling my honourable friend a Luddite when she was making her point about airspace modernisation, and clearly, yes, I'm afraid so, and clearly he's making that point that we do need modernisation, and I would say to him respectfully that both I and my honourable friend and our constituents recognise the need for innovation and to move with technology as it changes. And of course we want to reduce carbon emissions. And of course we support a better Heathrow, not a bigger Heathrow. We understand its importance to the economy. But on airspace modernisation, you can still achieve some of those benefits by adopting a do minimum approach. So looking at how you can gain the benefits of modernisation whilst not coming up with lots and lots of new flight paths and really intensifying noise over certain areas that perhaps aren't even overflown at the moment. We've seen in other countries, airspace modernisation has led to noise sewers. So can he offer some reassurance to the residents of Teddington, Twickenham, the Hamptons and St Margaret's that they're not going to end up becoming noise sewers, and will he commit to a do minimum approach and transparency on the process, please?
Well, not for a moment did I suggest that the honourable members will throw their sabots, as in sabotage, into the mill to grind it up. I do expect cooperation on this. I think we can make life better for all people, and a rising tide floats all boats, and it will be open and transparent. And I've already announced, Madam Deputy Speaker, the setting up of airspace design services, which will be going out for consultation, and I expect members to be fully involved in shaping its work over the next few years as we look to decarbonise our skies and improve them in the ways that I've just mentioned. There is so much to be gained. We can, we can move on the Scottish airspace. We can move on Northern England airspace. We're already moving on the South West airspace. The South East is going to be the hard bit to crack, and that's why this service will be focusing on that. So I hope we can honestly work together to get this done, hopefully in this Parliament, or if not in this Parliament, very close in the next one. So, in summary, the government recognises the impact of aviation noise and what it can have on local communities. At the same time, we live in a fully interconnected global world, and the aviation sector has material value for the UK economy. The government continues to strive for the correct balance for the impacts of aviation to the local community and the economic benefits that flight brings. And with that, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.